Greetings, trombonists at large. I'm the Vagrant Trombone, here today to talk to you, yes, about the fifth part of our trombone mouthpiece. We have the rim, the cup, the drill, or the throat, the back bore, and lastly, we have the outer shape of our mouthpiece, the blank. Some might consider this the firstly part of our mouthpiece, but for whatever reason, I decided to call it the fifth part, which is the blank. The blank is the outer shape of our mouthpiece. The blank has three parts as well. It has the rim blank. It is called the blank because it won't be finished until the interior of the mouthpiece has been cut. We have the body and we have the taper. Now, the body and the taper are the only parts of the mouthpiece that are really finished. That's what a blank is for a mouthpiece. The reason why the rim isn't cut or shaped is because, again, it's going to be determined by the interior. So this is just a blank slate that a manufacturer is going to use to make their mouthpiece on. A manufacturer once, many long years ago, I was talking to him mid-'80s. He was just starting to mass produce his mouthpieces. And I asked him about the shape that he had chosen for the outside of his mouthpiece. And he said, it's mostly just for marketing purposes. He said, when you see an Olds mouthpiece, you know it's an Olds mouthpiece. When you see a Bach mouthpiece, you know it's a Bach mouthpiece. When you see a Giardinelli or a Jet Tone, you know what they are. Even a Schilke or a Dennis Wick, you can kind of tell them apart from a Jet Tone mouthpiece when you see them in photographs. And he said, it's mostly just for my marketing that I chose the shape that I did. And I thought about that, and I thought, I don't really know if that's true. And I met him again a few years later, like 25 years later. I saw him and I said, hey, I see you're offering a heavyweight version of your mouthpiece. And he said, yeah, the weight of the mouthpiece blank really does affect the way it plays. And I thought, man, it took you that long to figure that out. So they cut these from long rods of brass bar stock. And they're just rods of stock. And they cut them into cylinders. They don't want the stock to be exactly to the outer diameter of the rim because there may be imperfections on that rod. There could be scaling or flake. There could be dents or damage in shipping. There might be tooling, machining marks on it from the extruding process. So they want to be able to cut off a certain amount. Yet they still want that rod to be close enough to the size of the final rim so they can save a few cents per rod. Another thing about the outside of the mouthpiece is the length of the mouthpiece. They want to cut it to a standard length so that they can get the most blanks out of a single rod for cost-saving purposes, for economy of size. So you will find that with Bach mouthpieces, almost all of them, large bore or small bore, are all about the same length. They're all about the same diameter. Now, they do have some mouthpieces that they do offer that are wider, but not typically. We have two types of taper that we have on our mouthpieces. We have the standard Bach taper, which is the Morris taper, which means for every inch of length, we get 5/100ths of increase in diameter. We also have the Remington taper, which was primarily used by Kahn and some other manufacturers, smaller manufacturers. It's actually the Brown and Sharp taper, which is more, which isn't as abrupt. It's not as an abrupt a taper, where the Morris taper is 5/100ths per inch. The Remington or the Brown and Sharp taper is 4/100ths per inch, or I think the actual number is like 0.04167. So, yeah, but tapers, something else for another time, right? So it means that the mouthpiece is going to be a little bit longer. Emery Remington, who was a trombone player and a teacher at Eastman in the 50s, is the one who wanted that longer taper. He felt that more distance between the venturi of his mouthpiece and the venturi of his lead pipe gave him a more stable, smoother, warmer sound. And that's what he wanted for his classical 88H. And so that was the taper that they used for a very long time in those instruments. I used to have a mouthpiece. I used to have a bass trombone that had the Remington taper on it, and I liked it. But the standard today, of course, is the Morris taper, 5/100ths per 1 inch of length. Now, the way that you can easily tell the difference between a Remington taper and a Bach taper or a Morse taper and a Brown and Sharp taper is the mouthpiece is going to be longer. You can see this mouthpiece is quite a bit longer, and that's to help push that venturi from here and the venturi at the lead pipe farther down. Why does someone always call? Back again. All right. So we have the longer Remington taper and the shorter standard. For the most part today, everyone uses the Morris taper. Yeah, well, one problem with the Remington taper that I was told over the Morris taper is that length, because when you're cutting blanks from a long rod of steel, or not steel, when you're cutting blanks from a long rod of brass, you want to maximize as many blanks as you can get from that rod for your economy of size. You want to be able to maximize your profit margin. And so because these mouthpieces, the Remington taper is slightly longer, you can't get as many mouthpiece blanks out of the same rod of steel, same rod of brass. So with a shorter Morris taper, you can get more blanks. Another issue is that where the mouthpiece is the thinnest is where you're going to be cutting away the most material, which means you have more waste product. And more waste means more bulk, which again can affect the cost of your overall profit margin at your bottom line when you have more waste and fewer blanks that you can create from a single rod of brass. So the Morris taper has that advantage. Whether this is true, I don't know. It's what I was told. But once again, your mileage may vary, people you talk to, because we're talking tenths of a cent, right, on some of this stuff. However, when you need to finance 10 million units, a tenth of a cent might add up to a lot of money at the end of the day. So maybe it's true, but the Brown and Sharp taper was left to the sands of time. So when you have a mouthpiece that is heavier, you're going to be moving that dynamic threshold. You're going to be moving that dynamic threshold. You're going to be getting a warmer, darker sound through that dynamic threshold up to about forte, where you will start to be able to build edge. And then from forte into fortissimo, you will be able to get that edgy, aggressive sound that you want, pushing that threshold of bright edge farther away. With a lighter mouthpiece, you're going to be getting warmth at lower volume, but you're going to start developing some edge sooner in the mezzo forte to forte range, where you will have it through the forte range, and then you're going to be getting to that edgy sound from forte to fortissimo. But your fortissimo won't be very long before you get to that bright edge that you don't want, where the sound falls apart. Lighter mouthpieces are more responsive. Heavier mouthpieces have more distinct articulation. The articulation is more crisp on a heavier mouthpiece. There's less puff on the sound, so to speak. When I'm playing jazz or something like that, when I'm playing on my small bore tenor, which is what I primarily do now, I don't really play any legit at all anymore. But when I'm playing that stuff, I actually like a lighter weight mouthpiece because I can play at lower volumes. I have more ease of articulation. I can articulate more cleanly, fast. It doesn't have the same kind of pop. I miss that pop. But I can still get around pretty quickly on a smaller, lighter mouthpiece, and I can get that more aggressive kind of sound, again, at lower volume, so I'm not overpowering a small combo. In a big band, I can get really centered, piercing sounds that I can overcome the rest of the band with on a lighter mouthpiece. When I was using heavier mouthpieces in those bands, I found that I had to work really hard to get the same kind of cutting power in the ensemble. And then when I was getting to that threshold where I felt like I was really getting some good cut, I was playing really loud, and it might be a little overwhelming for the rest of the group. So is the body of your blank important? Is it just for the marketing and branding of your mouthpiece company? No. It has a direct effect on your endurance, because if you're working harder, you're going to have less endurance. It has an effect on your tone. If you have a heavier mouthpiece that's bigger and warmer for longer, you can have a bigger, warmer sounding section with those heavier mouthpieces and still not be brutalizing your face. Sometimes playing at low volume on a small mouthpiece can be have more impact on endurance than playing loud on a heavy mouthpiece. So there's that whole balance too. So I guess that's about all I have to say, and it's way too much. I probably should have broken this down to a couple of shorter videos. But hey, if you're still with me, maybe I'll see you on the bandstand. And until then,